recording this, so hopefully, I'm sure they'll post it online whenever we're done. I'd like to start by thanking everybody for being here. I know we got some really good breakout sessions, so I hope all of you get some valuable information out of this one. This is my first year at Drupal GovCon and my first time presenting at a Drupal conference, so forgive me if I'm a little nervous. Today I'm going to talk about Drupal-as-a-Service and a product called Aegir. I've got a couple of demonstration videos that I'll show actually how to work with it and do some of this stuff with Aegir in the cloud using some automation. So first, a little bit about myself. My name is Jason Schulte. I'm a senior engineer for Mobomo and a director. I've got over 10 years of experience building web applications. For the last 8 years, I've primarily worked with Drupal, so starting with some Drupal 5, 6, and now all Drupal 7 sites. I founded a startup in 2007 that focused on developing Drupal sites and hosting. For the last 2 years, I've been a technical architect on the NASA West Prime contract. So we were responsible in 2013 from converting NASA.gov from a proprietary CMS over to Drupal, which was done in a really short period of time. And it was hundreds of thousands of pages, a lot of assets, and then more recently led the redesign effort, which was an architectural as well as a visual redesign of NASA.gov, which launched in April of this year. So, what is Drupal-as-a-Service? Well, as with any software as a service product, the first thing is going to be hosting. You want to if you're going to have multiple sites, they probably don't need to have their own server. So host multiple sites on shared infrastructure. It's going to allow you to save costs, as well as if you set up a cluster of Drupal servers, you can load balance all of your sites, make them all highly available. So multiple sites spread across a small cluster instead of each site having its own. The next thing to create a Drupal as a service product would be to establish a reusable code base of modules, libraries, themes that can be used by all of your sites. If none of you have used Drupal multi-site before, you'll see in this presentation that everything here is heavily leveraging Drupal multi-site. So you have a common core and themes shared across multiple sites. Each site just has its own database and file assets. Another important component of any software as a service product is management tools. You want to be able to rapidly deploy new sites, be able to do things like backups easily, and you want those tools to be scriptable. A web interface like Aegir is great, for administrators that need to create new sites, but you also want the tools to be scriptable for your DevOps people so they can, back up all your sites, with a script as opposed to having to use a web interface. And finally, the big one, automation. So, rapidly deploying new sites. This kind of goes along with management, but I wanted to highlight it separately because it's so important, not only to automate the deployment of new Drupal sites, but also to automate the building of our infrastructure. So we want to be able to take base server images and install the entire application, and that's kind of puts us down the path to auto scaling. So what is Aegir? Raise your hand in the crowd if any of you have heard of Aegir before. All right, cool. So quite a few. Aegir is one of those typical open source projects that suffers from the pronunciation problem. How do I say Aegir? Some people say Aegir, Aegir. I call it Aegir, so sorry if that offends anybody. Contents of this slide have been taken directly from the Aegir website, so you can read about it on aegirproject.org. If you read kind of their description of it, it's not really clear that this would be a product for building Drupal as a service. So if I had to describe Aegir in like one sentence, it would be a Drupal site for creating and managing other Drupal sites. So, as you can see here, Aegir is actually built on Drupal, so the Aegir core is just a completely unmodified Drupal core. And then the Aegir codebase itself is just a suite of Drush modules as well as custom Drupal modules that they've written that will do the things like creating a database for you, creating web server config. So if you know how Drupal and Drush work, then you already know a little bit about how Aegir works. So let's get into some of the terminology behind Aegir. You'll hear me mention these throughout this presentation. So first thing in Aegir is servers. In the classic sense, that's a physical box, could be running your web server or your database. But you don't necessarily have to think of it like a physical server. It's really just, within the Aegir, dashboard, a server is just a way to define the configuration for your services like Apache or MySQL. Aegir has to know what's the host name for your database server. Are you using Apache or Nginx? What port are you running on? Do you have SSL turned on? So, servers in Aegir are really just all of those configuration parameters. Next, you have platforms. So, platform is just the code, the actual directory where you're going to store all of your Drupal code, any modules, themes. And a platform does not represent an actual site. You don't have a domain name pointing at a platform. It literally is just the folder. And then you have sites. So a site is an actual Drupal installation. It has its own database. Every site lives under a platform. So, as far as naming your platforms, you could name them like usually Drupal and what version number, or if you're using like a custom distribution like one of the one that's used for wikis and stuff like that, or organic groups. But multiple sites live under a single platform. They each have their own database, but they share all the code in that platform. And then finally, you have tasks. Every action in Aegir is put into a queue, which allows the Aegir front end and the back end to be completely decoupled. And this is really significant in terms of security, because if we're going to do something on the front end that's actually going to create Apache configuration or create databases and things like that, we don't want our web server user to have those kinds of privileges. So the front end is just able to add tasks into the queue with some parameters, and then there's a back end user account, completely different user account, not the Apache or your web server's user account, that pulls tasks off the queue and actually processes them. So you have that separation of authorization access between the front end and the back end. And it also means that all your tasks in Aegir happen asynchronously. The front end is just going to add them to the queue and then show you a little spinner that whenever stuff's working. So let's talk about what it takes to get started with Aegir, and then here in a couple of slides I'm actually going to show you a video of me going through some of this stuff. So to get started with Aegir, obviously you have to install it, and you have to set up that back-end task handling service. There's a great guide on the Aegir community website for installing it, and it works with any flavor of Linux. And one important thing I'll bring up, Aegir is, I think by default they prefer Debian, but it'll work with any flavor of Linux, and it actually uses whatever distribution of Linux. It uses the built-in packages. You don't have to install a custom version of Apache. You don't have to install custom PHP. It'll even use the default locations for configuration. So it really works with whatever underlying flavor of Linux you want to use, which is nice from a DevOps perspective, because you're not I've seen some software as a service products that require you to install custom versions of those things, and they can be kind of a pain to maintain and keep patched as far as security. So then after you have Aegir installed, you're going to log in, you create a platform. The best way to create a platform is a Drush makefile. Not sure if anybody's used Drush makefiles, but if not, I would highly recommend you look into it. It's just like a simple text file where you define what version of core, what modules, themes you want downloaded, and then Drush will read that file and go download everything from Drupal.org, or you can specify, hey, I've got a custom theme, it's on GitHub, give it a URL, it'll go download your custom theme from GitHub or custom module, whatever. After you've got your platform in there, you're going to create a site within the platform. Again, Aegir will, take the domain name that you give it and a couple other parameters, and it will create the database for you. It'll auto-generate database credentials for that site, and then once it's done that, it'll run through the Drupal installer. You can choose, a custom install profile, and it's all automated. It does that stuff for you. And then once you have your site up, you've got an Aegir dashboard, and there's tasks to manage your site, like backing up your site. You can take your site offline, reset the admin password. And again, I'm going to show a video of me going through a lot of these tasks in Aegir. So,
like Apache vhost and stuff too?
yeah, it sets up your Apache vhost. Yep. I'm not going to dig in and show you where it's actually creating the config, but you can see, I'll create a site in Aegir and then pull it up, in another browser tab. So it's creating that Apache config and then restarting Apache. That's another thing that kind of goes back to the whole task queue. That back-end user has to have the ability to restart Apache, which is something you wouldn't want to allow your front-end web server system account to do. So, all right. So I'm going to do a quick little slide on each one of those steps I just mentioned. So, creating a platform. Again, I mentioned Drush makefiles. Here's an example of one that you're going to see me use in the video. It's pretty straightforward. There's good guides out there for creating, these Drush makefiles, specifying the core version. I've got a few modules listed: S3FS, libraries, admin menu, a couple of themes listed: Bootstrap, Adminimal theme. And then you can see I've created a custom profile that I've got, an installation profile that I've got hosted on GitHub. I'm specifying how to go download that. Again, lots of information, documentation about how to set these up, how you can specify specific versions for your modules and themes, or if you don't specify, then it just downloads the latest. You might be curious why I'm, specifying Drupal core 7.37, and that's because in my video I'm going to show how to do, if you had a site that was on 7.37, how you could do an upgrade to 7.38 in Aegir. So the next, after you've got your platform in there, and really all you have to do is give it a name, give it your Drush makefile, and your platform's done. So creating a site in Aegir, you just have to set up a DNS record. That's really the biggest thing, and then you fill out a form. Aegir is going to automatically create the database for you. Any custom installation profiles that are in your platform will automatically be recognized and presented to you on a list of radio buttons. So you just pick which profile you want. And then again, I'll mention that every site in Aegir is a Drupal multi-site. So if you're not familiar with Drupal multi-site, you can look that up. There's lots of documentation on Drupal.org, but basically nothing lives under sites default. Everything is under sites/site name. So it follows the standard, Drupal multi-site best practice. So then once you have your site up, working with the site, I kind of mentioned some of these. You'll have a dashboard with a list of tasks, and you can run those tasks, which adds them to the queue, and then the back-end task handler picks them up and actually execute them. So you can run a backup, which will just take a snapshot of your database along with all of everything that's under your files folder, tar it up and gzip it, and then put a name on it so you can obviously restore from it. There's a clone task where if you needed to do something like make a dev site, you just click the clone task, give it another host name, and it'll clone the whole thing for you. Migrate is kind of how Aegir recommends you do updates, which you're going to see here in the video. So if you have a Drupal 7.37 platform and then a 7.38 platform, you can migrate a site from 7.37 to 7.38 and make sure everything works, and that's how and then you're done with your update. And then also, like I mentioned, there's some tasks for disabling a site, taking it offline, re-enabling it, as well as resetting the admin password. I think our next slide here is the video where I'm going to show how to do all this stuff. So kind of talk through and make sure. hopefully we can see that. Okay, so that was just me logging into an Aegir site. And you're going to see I'm creating a platform, and that's the create platform, form right there. I've got my make file open in another tab. I just have it on GitHub, so I'm going to copy the link to this make file. Sorry if it's kind of hard to see, but you don't even actually put your have to upload the file. It'll just go fetch it the make file from wherever you have it. And then I kind of did a little time-lapse trick. It takes longer than that to actually verify, but I didn't want to have to. I knew I'd be short on time, so I kind of skipped over where the task is just spinning. So here's me creating a site. You can see that custom profile that was in my make file was there for me to choose. So I just filled out what domain name I wanted for my new site. That domain name's already been created and pointed at this server. The site installation is done. I'm going to run a backup real quick. Just give it a name. And snapshots the database, all the files. See, when that's spinning, that's whenever the back end has started processing that task. Then there's your login link and Drupal-7.37.mobomo.net. You're logged in. It's basically like a one-time login link. So I'm like setting the password. Here's my new Drupal site. It literally probably took 5, 6, 7 minutes to create. It's set the default themes that I had set up in that make file and in my custom profile. There's the status page where you can see it's on Drupal 7.37. The S3FS module that I had it install, I also put some custom configuration in my custom profile, so those items were set. So now I'm going to run through.
The make file is the same as in Drush, right?
Yep. Just a Drush make file, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. I'm going to make a Drupal 7.38 platform now, which is same make file, I just changed the version number. So simple example. And just linking that raw make file right into Aegir. That normal working copy radio button, that will actually keep, whenever it checks out that profile from GitHub, it would keep the .git folder if you wanted it to. So there, that profile's done, or that platform's done being created. You can see the two different platforms listed. There's one site on one and none on the other. So now I'm just cloning the site I had made, just putting -dev in the domain name. I'm going to choose to clone it onto the new platform, the 7.38 platform. Again, a little time lapse because this probably takes a couple minutes to run through an actual clone. And then I'm going to open up so go back to sites. You can see the new site is there. And opened it up in a new tab, so now we're logging in. I'm just kind of going to run through the same checks, basic Bootstrap theme is installed, the admin theme is set, my configuration parameters for S3FS are in there, and then most importantly, the site that was 737, now we've cloned it on 7.38. Everything basically looks good. So now we're going to say, we cloned it, we tested it, everything looks good, so we can delete the clone site. Have to disable it first, then we'll delete it, and then actually do a migrate of the first site. And so that would kind of be like a real quick, run through of how you could do like a Drupal core update with Aegir. Yeah. So I deleted that dev site, and now we just do a migrate. which, clone copies the site, and then migrate just moves it to the new platform. I think I went over here. You can see that site, after I deleted it, it's gone. That's why you see the default Ubuntu Apache page. And then after this migration is finished, we'll go over to the site, refresh it, flush the cache, and then look at the status report, and it's moved up to 738. So, and it'd basically be the same process if you were, upgrading modules and stuff too. You create a new platform with those new modules, and then you can clone sites onto the new platform and migrate them whenever you're ready. All right. So, how are we doing on time? All right, pretty good. Okay, so that's the first half of the presentation, basically talking about actually working with Aegir, kind of glossing over setting it up on the infrastructure, setting up your web server and stuff like that. So now I'm kind of going to talk about that a little bit. I mean, that's a long conversation, so some of this is still fairly high level, but if you want to get Aegir going to make a Drupal-as-a-Service product, one of the first things you're going to run into is scaling. I mean, you're going to have a bunch of sites, and that's kind of the assumption with this presentation, is that you wouldn't use Aegir to host, a huge site that, gets a ton of traffic. You'd use it to host a bunch of small sites, and then as you grow, how are you going to scale that? So by default, Aegir has, support for multiple servers. It's got contrib modules in it to make it. There's one called pack and one called cluster, where you keep things in sync through network storage, as well as Aegir will push stuff through rsync over SSH. With those modules, Aegir is basically aware of every physical server that is hosting it, which is not really compatible with auto scaling. And for those of you who don't know what I mean by auto scaling, I'm talking about basically the ability to dynamically add and remove web servers based on load. So if you have to make Aegir aware of every server, then every time you add one, you have to tell Aegir about it. Remove one, you got to tell Aegir about it. And if you're auto scaling multiple times a day or a week, I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't be done with scripting, but it has a unique set of challenges. So Aegir already has those contrib modules that work kind of with your classic data center where the infrastructure doesn't change. But I wanted to talk more about Aegir in the cloud. So with Aegir in the cloud, you wouldn't want to use those contrib modules because you don't want to have to make Aegir aware of every physical server that it's running on. You just want to make Aegir think that it is just a single web server and a single database server, and then you just clone that server multiple times. Aegir doesn't have to know about every underlying physical server. You just have to keep the configuration in sync. So we spend some time writing scripts to keep everything in sync, and then we can add and remove Aegir servers, and it's all compatible with auto scaling. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to show another video of how to set some of that up. So kind of run down the list of deploying Aegir in the cloud. First, the database, you want to have a separate database from your web server. You should be doing that anyways for any kind of production environment. That way you can always have multiple web servers pointing at a single database. Storage, I mean, there are existing contrib modules for cloud storage. You saw the one that I showed in the previous video for S3. I'm sure there's other modules for other cloud storage providers. You're probably going to have a better experience using those versus networked file systems. I mean, they both have their own caveats. I've worked with the network file systems, and there definitely is a unique set of challenges there, usually around performance. So then I talked about keeping everything in sync. again, use cloud storage to keep your Aegir configuration in sync across your multiple Aegir servers. So, in terms of S3, you can have a bucket for all of your web server config and the actual platforms and sites, and then another bucket for the individual Drupal sites files. Automation, so Aegir provides us the automation to deploy new sites, but then we also want to automate building Aegir, so that way when we're scaling it, we're deploying Aegir servers from base images, that we can rebuild at any time using something like Ansible, Puppet, Chef. I'm going to show the video that I'm going to show uses Chef to deploy Aegir from just base Ubuntu images. And those last 2 points, synchronize and automation, they're the more challenging ones to accomplish, but if you're able to do it, you'll have a product that's auto scalable and ready to work in the cloud. So I've mentioned S3, but haven't tried to kind of avoid talking about a specific cloud vendor. So this slide just kind of talks about how you would actually do this with AWS. Obviously for the database, you're going to use RDS. AWS, you can't really scale RDS, a MySQL instance horizontally. You can just throw more iron behind, make the instance size bigger. With Aegir, it would be kind of nice though, because if you did have 100 sites and you're overloading a single RDS instance, you could make a second RDS instance, move 50 of the sites, so you could kind of scale horizontally that way, but not in terms of like each site being scaled across multiple database servers. So that's one challenge, but RDS works really good for Drupal. I've done it in multiple projects. Storage, I've already mentioned that there's multiple contrib modules out there to use S3 for storing your file assets with Drupal. There's some caveats there, if you can set it up to where when files are uploaded in Drupal, they go straight up to the S3 bucket, and then whenever that node is displayed, you can reverse proxy, so your web server will pull from S3 and then send it to the user, or you can have it to where the user's browser actually pulls directly from S3, so that bandwidth doesn't have to, and that request load doesn't have to go through your server, which is great. But then it can also present issues as far as like cross-origin resource stuff if you're hosting, if your JavaScript's out there on S3 and it's got obviously under a different domain name than your main website. But there's documented workarounds for all that kind of stuff, and if you set it up, I've done it, it works really good. The automation piece, the video I'm going to show is using AWS OpsWorks, which really kind of gives you the framework for establishing the automation stuff that I've been talking about. OpsWorks is built on Chef, so it's kind of like just giving you a Chef server to work with to build out your instances and deploy your applications. And I've been using OpsWorks for a few months now. I really like it. I definitely have kind of a wish list of features, so if there's anybody here from AWS, come see me so I can give you my list. And then also with OpsWorks, if you get everything set up to where it'll, build your infrastructure and deploy your app, all through scripting, then OpsWorks has auto scaling settings built in that should, almost work out of the box. And so here's my video. How am I doing on time? Pretty good. Here's the video that I'm going to show of me actually setting up the whole Aegir stack in OpsWorks, and I'll kind of talk through that as I. Yeah, it's not very well. The preview image is not very clear. The video, I think, is a little bit better, hopefully. So that's just me logged into Mobomo's AWS account. I'm going to OpsWorks, add a stack, and fill out some parameters. Obviously, there's a lot to cover with AWS. I'm not going to go into setting up VPCs and security groups and all that. I'm really just kind of covering the OpsWorks portion. This advanced portion is important because We are telling it that we want to use custom chef cookbooks. So Mobomo's developed some, custom chef cookbooks, as well as, some custom Aegir modules that we are making open source to the community for doing this stuff. So here further along, you'll see where I pull in, or I actually pasted in the GitHub URL for those cookbooks. So now I'm adding a layer. I think the first layer I'm going to add here is the app server stack. So that's going to be, our web servers that are running Aegir. So there's our first layer. I think the next layer we're going to add is RDS layer for the database. You can see I'm kind of going to open up another tab to RDS, and then I start filling it out and then realize, like, for the sake of time, I just kind of skipped over all the steps to create an RDS instance, but you can kind of see me starting it here. Yeah, and then I skipped to the end, basically. So there's our RDS instance being created. And then when it's done, we go back to the OpsWorks tab, and we're going to add our RDS layer. It shows up there as being available. Put in the same credentials that you used to when you created the RDS instance itself. Register it with the stack. And then I think the next step here is to go in to the settings for our app server layer. Yeah, go into the recipes, and you can see there's a list of recipes there that AWS is going to run on any new server by default, and then you can specify your own custom chef cookbooks that are coming from. You can see the repository that was there, that URL that was there that I specified when I created the stack. Next, we're adding an ELB. Again, I'm not showing all the steps to create an elastic load balancer in AWS. It's pretty straightforward. Once you have that ELB created, you just come in here and you assign it. And so then OpsWorks knows anytime it creates an instance, it's automatically going to add it to that load balancer. So there we've got our 3 layers: load balancer, app servers, and database. So now we're going to define the app within OpsWorks. And I'm just going to call it Aegir. We've specified that the database we're going to use is the RDS layer that we've already defined. Give it a database name. Here I'm using another Git repository where I actually have the Aegir code with our custom modules. So it'll download that when it does a deployment. And then I'm putting in some other environment variables that the scripts and modules are looking for whenever the application gets deployed. So the repository for host master, which is one of the components of Aegir, the S3 bucket that I want it to automatically use to start syncing up the configuration, and then the domain name that I want to use for this new application, this new stack. So now we've added the app and we're ready to add some instances, add some servers. So basically you build out all that metadata and then you actually put some hardware behind it. I'm just going to advanced to set the default storage type to an SSD instead of magnetic volume. So now that you've added an app server, you can add more servers and they'll all get put behind that load balancer. That time lapse was probably pretty quick. It probably took 7 or 8 minutes for it to actually boot up that server. You can see, so now the server's up and running. I just hit the load balancer in another browser window. Right now it's just showing the default Ubuntu landing page because we haven't deployed our app yet. So now that's what I'm doing, is actually deploying the app that we defined, which again, all of this is heavily reliant on custom chef scripts that Mobomo's written. So now our app's been deployed, and I think the last thing I had to do here was actually take the host name of the load balancer and go create a DNS record for it. So whenever I was creating the app, I specified, I think, daz.dgc.mobomo.net. So create a DNS record for that, point it at the load balancer, and then should have a functioning Aegir site. And there it is. So everything stood up, with automated. I never had to touch the console. I didn't even, put SSH keys on the instance. So, all right. I think I got a couple minutes to spare. That is, that's pretty much it. Appreciate everybody taking the time, and we've got a couple minutes. If anybody wants to ask any questions, be happy to.
So, maybe lame, but from a business perspective,
Mhm.
What's the sell on this to tell the higher ups, hey, we want to use Aegir?
Basically, if if you're in a large federal agency that has a lot of little sites, internal sites, whatever, you could put all of them on on the same cluster server. So you could have literally as small as 2 app servers, 1 database server. It's highly available, it's load balanced, and you can host 50 sites on it, 100 sites on it. So the big thing is going to be costs. And that all depends on how many sites you have to host with it, right? So they like that shared infrastructure, for the hosting cost perspective.
So, you had like the 2 videos. So the first video is pretty much just a GUI for Drush, right?
Sure.
That's more or less a sense.
Yeah.
of it.
Mhm.
So it's only like in the second part once you start like sort of deploying with it where it's where true usability comes out, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I kind of, I switched them around. At first I had the deployment of Aegir as the beginning part of the presentation, and then using it. And then I thought, no, I should.
Yeah, it just seemed like a GUI for Drush, and I was like,
Right. And it is. I think the big and Aegir's a completely open source product. It's been around for a while, since Drupal-6, and it's great. The big thing to show there is that some of the customization work that we're doing to make Aegir a little more cloud friendly, so that it'll synchronize stuff, the config, your web server config, and platforms across multiple servers. Anybody else?
Did you use Aegir to build the NASA site?
No, but we are using Aegir internally at NASA. So NASA.gov, it's a huge site. It's 7-8 servers by itself because of how much traffic it gets. So for any giant flagship site, you're going to have one site hosted needing the power of multiple servers. That's not really the fit for Aegir. But internally, NASA has hundreds of small, center websites, and we are using Aegir for those. And some of them are public facing. They're not only internal, but smaller sites that don't get the amount of traffic as NASA.gov, but everybody, different little centers or divisions want to have their own Drupal site, manage their own content. They all think their site has got to be unique and stuff. Every site is a snowflake, right? So we use shared hosting and Aegir to accomplish that. So.
Did you play with Barracuda Octopus Aegir at all?
Yeah, I kind of looked at that. I think the big thing there why I didn't do it was I think there were some things that were going to make it a little more challenging to get going in the cloud. Some of that stuff I think did require custom packages, or maybe it was you had to use a certain flavor of Linux. I know it seemed like there were more restrictions on what kind of servers you could put it on and what tools you had to use. So, but I think it's good product.
When you update a whole bunch of sites at once through Aegir, how do you go about testing?
Yeah, automated tests, that would be a great addition, to Aegir to actually be able to run automated tests, as one of the tasks. And it's not that difficult to write. Aegir has its own set of hooks to run those to add your own tasks. Like we added stuff that when a new site's created, push that configuration up to S3. So right now there's nothing that will run automated tests. It would just be manual, regression testing when you would clone a site, but it's definitely would be something good to add.
I want to say that I've used a module, a plugin for maybe it's off of BOA versus Aegir.
Sure.
But all I would do is when I did a new deployment of something new and exciting and dangerous, before I put it out for the world to see it, I would clone.
Right.
And then I had a task to run all automated tests.
Yeah.
Run a full regression.
Yeah.
And that way, and I had it on, you have it on a satellite machine, so it's not going to impact your performance. So it just kind of creates a new machine off to the side, beats the hell out of it, comes back with any problems or errors or stuff, and then when you're done with it, tells the story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sure.
So how do you ever use Aegir or manage varnish servers?
Not to manage varnish. I mean, I know like the other diamond sponsor Acquia, in their control panel, they've got the ability to do basic clear varnish cache and stuff like that. Doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would be very difficult to write, but I personally haven't done it yet. All right.
Can you just fly a Drupal-as site?
Yeah, they'll just do that real quick.
I mean, is it supposed
Oh, yeah,
Have
the-
the platforms. I mean, I know it's written.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. The newer, I think the version of Aegir that I demoed in these videos is actually the beta version, which is based on the Drupal 7 core, and it will deploy Drupal 8. Yeah, they've got
So
a.
you can have them all on different
Mhm.
platforms.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.